I'm Julie Bartke with Session Update. You were just watching the Senate Environment and Energy Committee, and as you heard, members have recessed. They will return later this evening. But our coverage continues now with a news conference from earlier, choosing to eliminate any sales tax on clothing or services, but staunchly defending his fourth-tier income tax proposal. Governor Mark Dayton earlier today announced his revised budget plan. It maintains roughly $640 million in additional funding for education from early childhood to higher ed. But his proposed $500 homeowner rebate is now gone. For more details, here's that news conference from earlier today.
Improved state budget forecast has given me the opportunity to recalibrate my initial proposal on January 22nd. During that time, it has also become clear to me that the broad tax reform, which I had proposed, lacks the public and legislative support to be enacted. Thus, as I disclosed last week, I am discarding the extension of the state sales tax to business services. My principle of tax fairness then leads me to eliminate extending the sales tax to any consumer purchases. I now propose that no change be made to Minnesota's existing sales tax structure, including no taxation of either purchased services or clothes by families, individuals, or businesses. In addition to broad tax reform, my other two principal priorities have been, one, to make the overall state and local tax structure fairer to middle-income Minnesota families and individuals, and two, to raise sufficient revenues to make significant new investments in areas which would help grow our economy and create new jobs. I believe this revised budget proposal accomplishes those two goals. The most progressive state and local tax is the state's personal income tax. Therefore, my persistent efforts to add a fourth tier to the state income tax, which would raise taxes on only the top 2% of income earners, would reduce the current unfairness whereby middle-income taxpayers in Minnesota pay a 26% higher share of their incomes in state and local taxes than do the top 1%. My revised budget proposal would retain the snowbird tax, the cigarette tax, and the elimination of corporate tax loopholes as outlined in my initial proposal. Combined with the fourth tier, they would raise an estimated $1,816 million in the next biennium. That additional revenue is insufficient to permit the $500 per homeowner property tax rebate that I earlier proposed, reductions in the sales and corporate tax rates, or a freeze in the statewide property tax. However, there would be enough new revenue to eliminate the $627 million deficit now projected for the next biennium, and to fully fund my previously recommended investments in economic development and education. The improved budget forecast allows me to reduce additional tax revenues by $300 million, while also increasing the debt service to finance a $750 million bonding bill, fully fund Minnesota Care, and make other needed expenditures. I believe this proposal is the responsible, balanced budget that the people of Minnesota deserve. There are no shifts, borrowing, or other gimmicks to balance it. Just honest, straightforward accounting. We're still paying off those past debts. However, we're making great progress. We've repaid $1.9 billion of our debt to the school districts in the last 2 years. We will pay off the rest. Then we can begin future fiscal years with earned surpluses and move Minnesota even farther ahead. I'd like to ask now Commissioner Showalter to walk you through the first of the handouts. Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor. For those of you looking at your handouts, I'll be just walking real briefly through the slides that take you through the financials and summary of the Governor's supplemental recommendations. First slide on page 1. It shows you the top level view of the Governor's recommended changes based upon the February forecast. As you'll see, the revenue changes, the expenditure changes leave us with a budgetary balance of $8 million on the bottom line. As the Governor underscored in his remarks no shifts, no gimmicks, and I'll walk you through some of the pieces of that on the next couple of pages. On page 2, you'll see the changes really between the governor's initial recommendations and what are here in the March supplemental recommendations. At the top, you'll see that the forecast improved the budgetary picture by $323 million. Under forecast revenues, you go to the right-hand side of that column. So the revenues increased as part of that overarching budget change. The other part of the forecast change is shown below under forecast spending, where you see a reduction in forecast spending. Layered into that now are repriced governor's recommendations, because we're basing them on this new estimate of economic caseload information that we have from the February forecast, along with any policy changes that are included in the supplemental recommendations. Together, they get you to a change that is very small from his initial recommendations of just $2 million different. Included in that, on the next page, is a more detailed listing of the provisions that the governor walked through at the, and here you see them at the aggregate level in the numbers. On the individual income tax, that's not a change in his recommendations. What you see here is the impact of the forecast, which improved revenues between last November and presently by about $297 million, plus the withdrawal of the property tax credits. If you recall, that was about $1.4 billion. That was netted against the individual income tax revenue. So that plus the forecast change equals the $1.7 billion change that you see there. On the other, go down a couple other lines. What you see is the sales tax changes. And what you would anticipate there is a decrease in revenues due to the elimination of the sales tax broadening, both on businesses and on consumers. Put those together with the other changes that you see here. Most of the other changes that you see on this change sheet, by the way, are related to the forecast, not necessarily proposals changing on a net basis for the governor's recommendations. And you see that the total revenue picture changes by $26 million. That is paired with changes to the governor's spending recommendations on the next page. Here, again, you see the impact of the forecast plus changes in recommendations. On the first line, you see changes in the education spending. That is really almost entirely $9 million of forecast change. $13 million change in higher education is a deficiency request. And there's, on net basis, very small changes to the package of recommendations that the governor put forward in January. Included in that is an increase in debt service of $22 million to support the larger capital budget recommendations that the governor recommended or mentioned earlier, for a total net change of spending of $47 million. As with his initial package, this set of recommendations both balances the current biennium, so without any shifts, without any one-time actions, and it also goes into the next biennium in a sustained fashion. On the last chart, you'll see the changes to the budget as we go into fiscal year 16 and 17. Structural balance in that biennium is $305 million. What it does not include, of course, is the growth in the sales tax expansion, which would have significantly improved the balance in those future years and would have been designated to pay off the K-12 payment shifts. This amount is still about enough to pay off the 8 payment shift in 16-17, and as the governor noted, we are certainly making progress with each successive forecast either way. As usual, MMB will be providing detailed item-by-item descriptions of changes in the governor's supplemental recommendations. Those should be coming out in the next couple of hours. We will put those on our website for you to be looking at and going through, and anticipate agencies working with the legislature through the committee hearing to talk about each of these changes. On a net basis, though, this provides you, I think, a summary of the high-level expenditure and revenue changes in the supplemental recommendations.
I just want to close by saying that some people say, well, you know, you don't need any additional revenues to be able to balance the budget. what they don't say is that there's a $627 million deficit that then would have to be made up with further cuts in the existing budget forecast. And just saying no to tax increases is not a budget plan, and it's not responsible. If people don't want to raise any additional revenues, then they need to cut $627 million out of the budget, and it's their responsibility to tell us where they're going to cut, how much, who's going to be affected, and who's going to be hurt. We went through this for the last 2 years, where it couldn't get the majority in the legislature to come forth honestly and say, where are you going to cut? And the same principle applies, and I challenge them, if they're going to take that tack, which I expect they will, to tell us specifically where you're going to cut. Furthermore, I think these additional investments in education are crucial to moving Minnesota forward. And I found that even among those who don't want to pay taxes to support them, there's generally very, very broad support for undertaking the new initiatives in early childhood education, creating a continuum through optional all-day kindergarten, read by the 3rd grade, linking high school to higher education, training our young people for the jobs of the future rather than the past. So those investments are all ones that I think have widespread support, and that the experts tell us are going to be crucial to the economic success of our state in the future. So I think it's a balanced approach. As I said before, it's a balance of selective revenue increases, raising taxes only on the wealthiest 2% of Minnesotans, and also making investments that are going to pay off for a better Minnesota. So I'm glad to respond to questions on this topic.
Governor, did you brief this with DFL legislative leaders, and are they backing this fully?
Talk with them about it in general, but I have not. Staff may have shared it this morning in the details that you have here now, but talked about the general outlines of it. You have to ask them whether they support it or not. I believe so.
Governor, does this mean that you would veto any sales tax reform, broadening sales tax, clothing tax?
Well, I'm not going to get into, veto. I'm not going to use that word at this point in the legislative session. I don't support any increase in or change in the sales tax as it relates to anybody. And that's my position. I think that's sound fiscal policy and good public policy, and I'll try to persuade any legislators who think otherwise the wisdom of that.
So are you retaining the metro sales tax for transportation, though?
Yes, that goes on, because this, again, is dedicated for a specific purpose there.
Because you're a smaller base?
Well, there's some question, because it was calculated on the basis of the broader sales tax base. So it was originally a quarter cent, and now there's some debate whether it needs to be a half cent or whether they could say a quarter cent, which they're thrashing out in local government affairs committee and the like. So I don't know the answer to that one.
Governor, much of the criticism of the business-to-business sales tax was on the grounds of competitiveness, that it would make Minnesota anti-competitive. The same thing is going to be said about this higher income tax rate. How is this a different situation?
Well, then, again, I think it's incumbent on those who don't want the higher income tax rate, who probably are going to also oppose closing the corporate tax loopholes, to tell us, what's their alternative? I mean, if we didn't have all these past debts to pay off, and we could have taken that $1.9 billion of surpluses over the last 2 years and carried that forward, as you would normally, into the next biennium, we'd start the biennium with a $1.3 billion surplus rather than a $627 million deficit, and we wouldn't need to raise anybody's taxes. But that's not the situation that we inherited from the past. $627 million deficit, and if you're not going to raise income taxes, you're not going to raise corporate taxes, then where are you going to get the additional revenues, or where are you going to cut? And that's what everybody leaves out. This is part of a package, part of a responsible, balanced package to balance the budget and make new investments that we need for a better future. And those who don't want to pay a single dollar more in taxes need to own up to the responsibility to tell us what are the consequences of that.
Governor, is this still bold? Majority Leader Bott called this bold, unlike anything you'd seen since Rudy Perpich. Is it still bold?
Well, it's not as bold as it was before. I talked about Plan A, B, and C. This is Plan B plus, I'd say. You know, but you know, I think it's one that can have legislative support, public support, and accomplishes the other two objectives. As I said, it makes our tax system more progressive overall, less regressive, I should say, less regressive overall, and it generates enough additional revenue along with the improved forecast to be able to fund the priorities that I have made in education and economic development incentives.
Governor, should the Minnesota Chamber feel fortunate that they aren't getting the business-to-business tax, and that they should they, quote, suck it up and stop lobbying against the top bracket?
No, I mean, that's been their consistent position for two plus years I've been governor. No additional taxes, and they have a right to that position. And again, my issue there is that they don't recognize the fact that state spending has been reduced significantly, both in real and relative terms, for the last decade. So we're not talking about reducing an increase. We're talking about trying to turn the corner on what is right now the lowest level of state support for higher education since over 30 years ago in real dollars. And secondly, that they don't offer any explanation for where that $627 million cut would have to come from to offset the projected deficit. But they still have the right to articulate whatever position they want.
Governor, what corporate loopholes would be closed?
Well, I'll leave that to Commissioner Franz here, but you want to go ahead and...
We would essentially have the same corporate loopholes in the original package: the foreign operating company credit or deduction, the foreign royalty payment deduction, and some other minor ones that are listed in the handout papers. But it's essentially the same package. It is the same package that we had before, but we would continue to ask the affiliate nexus or the e-fairness be changed so that those companies who are selling out of state into Minnesota, who have people selling on their behalf in the state of Minnesota, would have to collect a sales tax. So we would add that affiliate nexus to the corporate reform area as well.
Governor, I know you hesitate to give ultimatums, but is the income tax your bottom line? Does it have to be there for you to support it by the
Well, again, I'm open to alternatives, and the legislative process in terms of the tax and spending side has really just begun. The targets are going to be issued, I think, next week and the week then after the Easter recess, and then we'll get a focus on what the levels of spending they are proposing and how that spending will be allocated, and then we'll see what kind of tax proposals they have to raise revenues to balance the budget, and then we'll have something to talk about. So far, we've had my proposal number one, now my proposal number two, and as I learned 2 years ago, until there's something to compare that with coming from the legislature, it's hard to have a focused discussion. So we'll get there soon enough.
Governor, are you concerned the snowbird tax is going to drive some wealthier Minnesotans out of the state permanently?
No, I think it's going to make them pay their fair share of taxes if they want to come back and spend time with their children and their grandchildren.
Well, you spent less than 6 months here and
pay nothing.
Avoid the tax.
And pay nothing. I mean, the practical difficulty is with the hospitality industry and areas like Brainerd Lakes and others in that part of the state where people come and have essentially second homes, summer homes, and they're there for 2-3 months. I don't know how many people there are in that category, but that's a concern that's expressed, and I don't know how to work around that. But I just believe in the principle of tax fairness. You pay according to your income, your wealth, and if you're going to be here for 5 months and 29 days, using all the services that all the rest of us pay taxes to support, then you ought to pay a proportionate share for doing so. And to me, that's just simple fairness. And this attitude that people want to make more and more money and pay less and less taxes or pay no taxes or get a rebate is just really distressing, because this society won't be successful if that becomes the prevalent ethic going forward.
And yet, Governor, at the same time you acknowledge that snowbird likely not to pass?
I don't think it'll pass unless we're going to work out this hospitality issue. Again, I don't know how many people are affected by that, and what our options might be, but that's a sticking point.
Governor, are you more comfortable with this budget? This is what you had campaigned on, taxing the rich, and at the time you were campaigning, you're against sales tax. increases. Are you more comfortable in your soul and your legacy with this budget than you were before?
Well, the Department of Revenue modeled over 100 different scenarios with different families, different income groups, individuals, different parts of the state on the sales tax, and it came out revenue neutral overall and basically revenue neutral for individual families or individuals in terms of paying sales tax on more items, services, and clothing, but paying a lower rate. We dropped the rate 20%. We dropped the rate from 7th highest rate in the country to 27th highest in the country. And so that came out even, and then most of those families would get a $500 property tax rebate every year ongoing. So in my view, most Minnesotans, middle-income Minnesotans, came out paying less taxes, state and local, no more at the state level at all, and less taxes because of the property tax rebate than they would before. So I consider that consistent with my principles. I mean, it's a different way of getting there, but it certainly accomplished that. And now this is not going to provide the property tax relief, and the legislature, I've encouraged them to look at ways that they can do so. It'll be more limited with the amount of revenue, but I still think property tax relief is very important. And so this doesn't allow us to do as many things as we would with a broader reform, but that's the way it is.
Again, you were just watching a portion of the governor's news conference from earlier where he provided an overview of his revised budget plan. It's a plan the Republicans continue to dislike. Taxapalooza was the term Senate GOP caucus leader David Hann used. So for the GOP reaction, we'd like to show you that news conference from earlier today.
Real quickly, we don't take up too much of your time. We have not seen all the numbers. We've not gotten any detail on the governor's revised budget yet. What we do know is that the governor has proposed modifying his budget, but still an increase of $1.8 billion in taxes to solve a $627 million problem with no reform in the spending side. We have not heard anything from the legislative leaders. As far as we know, many of the taxes that the governor has said is not in his proposal are still on the table as far as the legislative leaders are concerned, so we are not sure where they're at. We are very concerned about this. We don't think this is right for the Minnesota economy, right for the people of Minnesota. It's kind of government gone wild down here. We're getting close to spring break, taxapalooza. So we're just willing to be here to help and offer solutions that we think do work, which is the direction our budget took 2 years ago, where we said let's offer some restraint, try to live within the means that the people of Minnesota have offered to the government, and try to restrain the spending growth to within the growth of the economy. We think that works. That has generated revenue. We think that's the direction for the people of the state of Minnesota, not additional tax burdens on the economy. And let's make sure if we're going to spend money, we get real reform and effective spending and effective results.
Thank you. As the senator said, we're waiting to see kind of the final proposal. We expect those numbers will be out in an hour or so. Initially, our reaction, obviously, I'm happy to see the governor has reeled back some of the tax proposals that he's put forward. We know that those are going to be damaging to Minnesota's economy. We feel Minnesota's economy is headed in the right direction. Unemployment's down. People feel like the economy is recovering, and people really understand right now that taxes are the wrong direction. And it was interesting to see in recent polling that people really understood that taxing Minnesota businesses would make them less competitive, and how unpopular that actually was with the public. So we know, and we know that the public is starting to see that the governor's tax proposals were going to be harmful to the economy. I'm a little dismayed to see that the governor hasn't completely realized that taxes are going to be bad for Minnesota's economy. He's still proposing about $1.8 or $1.9 billion of taxes, and that's going to be about $2.9 billion of additional spending in the next biennium from the last. Again, Minnesota's economy has grown over the last 2 years. The unemployment rate is down, and we feel like things are headed in the right direction. And we know that Minnesotans understand that raising taxes in a fragile economy will actually hurt Minnesota's economy and hurt job growth in Minnesota. We also are a little concerned that we haven't heard from the legislative leaders, the Democrat leaders of the House and the Senate, that the tax proposals that we're talking about in the legislature, that they haven't retracted those and pulled those off of the table. We're talking about huge gas tax increases, continue to talk about sales taxes and those kinds of things. The governor did not give an indication today that he would veto a sales tax. So we're a bit concerned about some of those things. Both legislative leaders said a few weeks ago that they thought that at least a partial business-to-business tax would be part of the final deal, and we know how damaging that would be on Minnesota's economy, so we continue to stand opposed to that. But we really want to stand for what we've seen over the last couple of years, which has been growth in Minnesota's economy, a reduction in unemployment, and we know that all Minnesotans win when Minnesota's economy grows and we let the private sector create jobs. So that's what we want to accomplish, and we stand ready to work with the governor and the legislative leaders to accomplish that.
Mr. Speaker, what would be your alternatives to this? How would you balance the some $600 million budget deficit without raising any revenue?
You know, we obviously handled a $6.2 billion deficit over the last biennium, and we did that by finding efficiencies, and I think there's more that we can continue to find there. We're committed to finding a government that works better and not a government that's just more expensive. And we think that's the answer. So we can continue to find efficiencies, but we've also seen the economy grow, and we've got about a $3 billion surplus in the current biennium. So we know that by letting Minnesota's economy grow and let the private sector create jobs, that we'll actually see more revenue to the state. So we don't have to raise taxes to get additional revenue to the state. We can actually let Minnesota's economy grow, and we'll accomplish just exactly that.
What happened to the governor's original proposal? Did it fail to get legislative public support, or did it fail to build that?
Well, we think that he's been out trying to get support. I don't think that the people of Minnesota were responding to that effort. I don't know that there was a lot of support in the legislature, clearly none from our side. As Representative Dowd mentioned, the legislative leaders on the other side did talk favorably about some elements of the governor's plan. I don't know behind closed doors what they were saying, but we don't think the people of Minnesota broadly supported what the governor was talking about. All I heard across the state was criticism of his plan.
I'll echo that. Obviously, the governor's original plan didn't have a lot of legislative support, really, frankly, from either side of the aisle, and it says something when not even Democrats in the legislature are supporting a tax plan. So obviously, we think that there's an appetite for spending with the DFL in the legislature, and we're a little afraid of where we're going to try to find the kind of revenue that we think to accomplish the kind of spending that they want. But the thing that I thought was most interesting is the public didn't respond to the governor's tax increases. So we're seeing signs that the public really understands that what's going to be good for Minnesota is to grow Minnesota's economy, and they see that tax increases stop that from happening.
The public does seem to respond to the fourth tier, doesn't it? The public does seem to respond to the fourth tier.
Well, that's unclear to me if they've responded to that or not. I think that's been a part of the whole plan that he proposed, but most of the discussion in the last couple of weeks has been around the sales tax, business-to-business tax. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks as there's more focus on this plan. But I think the key is the taxes are to support something. What is it supporting? It's supporting a spending regimen, and I think you got to look at what is the spending for. And that's where we have real problems when you look at the amount of spending that he's proposing and what is it accomplishing. There's no reform. There's nothing that you can point to say that this is going to accomplish good things for the people of Minnesota. That's what we need to focus on. What are we going to accomplish with the money we're going to spend?
Speaker, you saw the poll that shows that the majority supports the fourth tier. The same poll you guys used to say that they didn't support the B2B.
Well, all I would say is I know that most of the focus in the last couple of weeks has been on the business-to-business taxes. We'll see that now that that is off the table, what the focus turns to on the other. I do know that a lot of people that are going to be hit by this fourth tier are not necessarily individuals, but are small businesses, and we'll see what their voice looks like in the next few weeks.
How do you, Mr. Leader, as Republican leaders, stop the fourth bracket?
Well, I think it'll be time for the public to weigh in. We didn't have the votes to stop the sales taxes and the business-to-business tax, but I think the people of Minnesota said very loudly and clearly this is not good for the economy, and I think the governor has said that high taxes hurt the economy. And so I think it's time for the people of Minnesota to weigh in on all the taxes and just ask the question, do you need high taxes to grow the economy? We don't believe so.
But isn't it the case that the sales tax it's allegedly affected a broad group of people, whereas the one the governor still has in his proposal is only 2%. They got a heck of a lot less number of votes.
The question in my mind isn't about votes, it's about do higher taxes help grow the economy or do they hurt the economy? That's going to be the debate. That's what the people of Minnesota need to weigh in on.
I think the interesting thing about the top tier tax is that recent polling has been far lower than it has been in the past, surprisingly low in fact. So we know that people are understanding that raising taxes is going to be harmful to Minnesota's economy. And I think that's the takeaway. The governor's original budget fell flat. People didn't like it. He's retracted that. We're glad to see that. But you know, this new tax proposal continues to be a tax on the middle class. There's very regressive taxes on cigarettes. He's actually you know, continuing that in this current budget. We think that out of the legislature we'll continue to see other regressive taxes, and we think that's the wrong move for Minnesota.
Do you believe a fourth tier won't pass this session?
You know, I don't know, and that's obviously up to the Democrats in the legislature, but we hope that people who are concerned about taxes negatively affecting Minnesota's economy will reach out to the legislators and tell them that they think that's the wrong move.
Mr. Leader, do you guys intend to put together a detailed alternative to this?
You know, we haven't determined that yet. We'll certainly talk about that, but right now we hope that we can still roll up our sleeves and work with the Democrats to come up with a bipartisan budget, but we think this one falls short of that. Thank you.
You were just watching news conferences from earlier today on the governor's supplemental budget. The House and Senate leadership have indicated committees will have their budget targets sometime next week.